I feel like I'm allergic to something in my own apartment. I really do. I don't even want to know what's. I don't even want to know what's growing in my old apartment because I'm.
Maybe your cat.
Well, I've got cats growing in my own apartment, yes, but I don't even think it's them. I think before then, I was constantly feeling a little backed up, a little, nasally backed up, and so I'm constantly clearing my throat. Excuse me, everybody
All those
out there.
Books are shedding.
Probably.
Yeah, you've got
God knows what they're shedding.
How many books do you think you have?
I don't even want to speculate. It's
Above,
like probably.
Yeah.
What do you think? What would you guess?
What I would say is like 10,000 reasonable?
Probably
10,000.
I would say
10,
maybe.
You should reinforce the floors in your apartment.
The shelves start to sag, and it's like it's a mania with bibliomania. It's a genuine thing. It's like it's a collecting mania thing. It's for real. I've read probably like 1/50th of probably all the books in here.
But you could be reading an article and it could reference like some obscure author, and you'd be like, "Oh, let me see if I have that." Right?
Right. Yeah, well, that's true. And that is kind of the goal, is that I'm like, oh, I happen to have something here about that. Yeah, which is like I wanted to make a fucking library, which is just psychotic. This is Chinwag, by the way. Sorry. This is welcome to
mania.
The Chinwag. Yeah, speaking of mania and maniacs, this is the Chinwag podcast. Welcome to it. This week it's just going to be Stephen and I. A special, I was going to say solo, but that's not solo. It's a duet. Just a duet.
A duet.
A duet. A pas de deux, as it were, to borrow from the world of the ballet.
Indeed.
Yes, indeed. Oh, God, the ballet. Gosh almighty.
Do we need an episode on the ballet?
Well, could be interesting. I won't go into this now, but as a child, I was once in a ballet, and I'm going to leave it at that.
Oh, man.
And I'm not going to elaborate on that. And maybe someday I'll talk about that.
All right.
I was in a ballet as a child. Yes, it's just going to be you and I, and we're going to be talking about what they call mass panics. Mass hysteria.
Yep.
Mass delusion.
It goes by a number of different titles, but I think that's basically where we're going to get into some interesting examples. The classic Orson Welles War of the Worlds radio play, stuff like that.
Correct. Things like that. But also some more obscure things, and then just what, it relates to a lot of things. More recent.
It's still going on.
More recent, very much so. And then, as usual, we'll try to relate it to larger issues and themes in the greater world.
Indeed.
Right, Steve?
That's what we're all about. Like
dig into the relevance. But before we do that, of course, we urge all of you to visit Apple Podcasts and other platforms to
reviews. Good reviews, please.
Review or rebuke. If you want to rebuke us, you can do that too.
Save that for an email, maybe.
Okay, yeah, right. Keep that just between us. If you really want to take us out, keep that. But go and rate us and review us, and please write.
Yeah,
emails,
and
Instagram, all these things.
On, Twitter and Threads and all that. Yeah.
Are we on Threads? Are we
Apparently
now on Threads?
We are making a movement in that direction.
That is the cutting edge.
Yes.
We are on the absolute cutting edge.
But also, people need to check out these animations on YouTube because
correct. We are also on
our animator.
YouTube.
Holy God.
We have tremendous animations that go with the audio version of the show on YouTube, drawn by
the great Alex
created
Sokol.
By Alex Sokol, like outstanding, beautiful animations that go along with the podcast on YouTube. So please indulge us by doing that, and indulge yourselves.
Avail yourself of that wonderful opportunity.
Indeed. So here we go, Steve. This is where we're going to move on to now, which would be mass hysteria, mass delusion, mass panic. And my first query to you, Professor, is there a difference between all those things, or do they all fall under the same title of psychogenic illness or mass psychogenic illness? Are they different things?
I think you're right. Psychogenic is a broader umbrella. It just means sort of origin in the mind, and it includes a lot of stuff under it. I don't think that psychologists and sociologists have a very clear, universal use of the terms. But if you look at the word hysteria, actually, this is kind of interesting. The word hysteria comes
has
from
an
the Greek
interesting
word.
origin.
It means uterus, basically.
Yeah. Hysterectomy, hysterectomy, and those things. Hyster means womb, I think, in Greek, right? Yeah.
And people know that it got turned into a kind of word, sort of a term of abuse or prejudice against women, like in the early psychoanalytic tradition. And the idea was that, Victorian women were suffering from something called hysteria, and they needed, maybe sex would help. This sort of a bad theorizing.
So is hysteria a word that has its origins in the 19th century, or does it go further back?
Oh, it goes.
And they just adapted it.
They adapted
Interesting.
it. Yeah, it goes way back, and there's reference to it in the ancient world too, as a kind of. But
women are going crazy.
Yeah, that women were going crazy, and now it's no longer considered a professional term, But the diagnosis of hysteria went down starting in the 20th century as the diagnoses of anxiety and depression went up. They went directly. Inverse to each other.
But it was just a matter of semantics. They took on a different word, probably.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, that's good.
And it means basically like you're having an uncontrollable like emotional experience. Basically, is what they used it to mean. Whereas delusion is more like a false belief. So you're paranoid. You think somebody's out to get you, and then hallucination. Is sort of can be auditory or visual. And I think in the case of schizophrenia, you have higher levels of auditory hallucination where you hear voices, whereas I think in certain kinds of drug use, you get more visual hallucinations.
But schizophrenia is a term that's not really widely used anymore, is it? Is that like a blanket term? But that I was my understanding that's not really a word anybody uses anymore.
I think like some people. No, I think it is still used in certain professional circles, but I'm not going to swear to it. I hear professionals use it.
I know. It's funny. I've heard it sometimes too, and it jumps out at me, and I'm like, "Oh, are we not supposed to say that anymore?" I always thought it was a kind of it has such derogatory connotations.
There's a general term like they call it psychotic illnesses. I don't know that that's any better.
Right. I know, yeah. You're not schizophrenic, you're just psychotic.
You're just psychotic.
Listen, to put your mind at ease, you're simply psychotic. Don't
so
panic.
Much better. So much better.
This is no. He's not schizophrenic, he's psychotic. Yeah, no, that's true. Not much better. But that's interesting. So delusion and mass delusion and mass hysteria are different, but they obviously both lead to panic.
Yeah,
they can both lead to panic.
They can lead to panic, yeah.
Yeah. Although not in all instances, as we will discuss, there are some of these, we're interested in some of these things like the Beatlemania and Elvis, which are things that don't have the connotation of panic or fear in them, but they have this idea of mass sort of movement of people joining into this incredibly energetic, intense experience en masse.
Yeah, it's like a weird social dynamic.
But anyway, that's interesting. So this is the basic idea, is sort of a shared sense of kind of fear generated by this intense emotional experience that's shared by everybody.
Yeah. And if it's a delusion, then there's the added ingredient, which is that you're having a false reality, that it's not reality.
And so would like a classic example of that, which is the Orson Welles radio broadcast of 1938 of the War of the Worlds broadcast.
So good.
Which is so good, which I used to listen. I used to have an LP of that when I was a kid. Yeah, that I'd listen to over and over and over again. My grandfather remembered hearing it on the radio.
Oh,
my grandfather
live.
could. Yeah, wow. My grandfather remembered hearing it on the radio. And fortunately, I can say, to honor my ancestors, he was not stupid enough to believe it was real. Although I shouldn't say stupid. He did not believe it was real. He was not that he was stupid or anybody stupid for having believed it. It's just that he didn't buy it. But that's an interesting one, because that's where Orson Welles did this very clever version of War of the Worlds on the air that was aired as a real radio broadcast, at least for part of it. was that
didn't they like interrupt fake broadcasting or something?
They faked the fact that they were interrupted. They had said, if anybody had listened to the beginning of the show, they would have known that it was just a play. But it was this thing of kind of this. It's an early version of this kind of mockumentary kind of thing. It's this sort of like, which I always wonder if it's one of the first instances of that, because before in radio or something, I mean, people would hoax people in print media, but no, I don't wonder if anybody had really done anything like this in radio before.
That's a great question, because radio was still relatively new.
Yeah,
and you could do it in print, but it's not the same.
No. I always wonder that if it was one of the first instances of somebody doing that at all.
I remember watching, when I was in high school, I think is when that great, what's the heavy metal send-up mockumentary, Spinal Tap came out.
Spinal Tap, yeah.
And I remember thinking, this is the most hilarious thing ever. And I watched it with a friend of mine who was a heavy metal fan, and he was like, I don't get it, man. These guys aren't good. And I'm like, no, it's kind of a joke. And he's like, what do you mean?
Well, that they said they went out and played concerts and were like, people are coming to this like we're an actual band. Yeah, well, there you go. There's a weird delusion or a mistaken assumption about something.
Yeah, it's a mistake, I think.
But the War of the Worlds thing is interesting because it's like people were wrong about it. And so it's like there's a panic happening, but there's also this delusion happening too, that it's real. So it's like both things kind of.
But then look at in terms of the timing, Hitler is on the march in Europe in 1938, and people are freaking out about real stressors, geopolitical stressors.
Yeah.
And so you put that together, and it seems like it must really.
That seems to be a theme in this stuff, that there's kind of social, cultural, political stress happening to people that helps to generate people being in a position to already be kind of ready to go off because things are not great, things are bad. And another element of that one, which at that time and everything, is the force of the media then kind of exacerbating it. In this instance, you're actually getting it from the media source.
Yeah.
He's gaming the media source, so it's already really fucked up because this thing you're trusting not to lie to you about the news is telling you that the fucking Martians have landed at Grover's Mill or whatever the fuck of Grover's Mills. And it's like, so that's really fun. It was really clever of him to induce, I mean, he didn't mean to induce the panic, but the idea that because I think in a lot of these panics, the media doesn't help.
No,
as usual, the media, doesn't help.
Does not help.
No, but the media doesn't help. The media ramps this stuff up, and sort of that kind of cycle, that thing that kind of cycles things through.
Well, did you hear that they did it a few years later in the 40s?
Everybody. Oh, they did a similar thing?
In Ecuador. It got so much worse in Ecuador. They did it in the 40s in Ecuador, in Quito, Ecuador. And the guy before he actually
did a Martian invasion pod.
He got Orson Welles' actual radio play, and he just put it on in Spanish.
I didn't know this.
Changed the names, but here's how diabolical he was. He ran fucking stories in the newspaper the week before about fucking spots on Mars and shit. And then
now this is a guy deliberately doing this because he'd witnessed the panic already.
Yes. And it got totally out of hand.
Now, who was it? Was this Ecuador's Orson Welles? Was he like the
Ecuadorian Orson Welles?
Ecuador. Wow. Think of that guy. That guy's fascinating. I want to know more about this guy.
He was almost killed. What happened was people ran en masse to churches to hide.
And by the way, the thing that happened for anybody we're talking about this is that it created a mass panic. People freaked out when Orson Welles did it and started trying to flee their homes. And I think somebody killed themselves, I think, maybe.
That's the legend.
Suicide
I don't know if that
attempts,
one was true. But
yeah, but anyway, so in Ecuador, in Quito, Ecuador.
Yes, so
this happened and it was worse.
And it was worse, and the military actually mobilized and started to go to where he said shit was happening.
Holy shit!
Then, like, when they finally got on the radio and said, like, hey, it's a fake, it's a joke, get this, they stormed the radio studio and they fucking burned it to the ground. I shit you not.
No,
six
because
people
they
died.
were pissed, or because they thought maybe they were lying, or oh my god!
Well, I don't know. Maybe all of the above. Yeah.
I've never heard about this.
Seriously,
this is crazy.
Is it crazy?
I've never heard about that, and that's amazing. And there you go. There's a guy utilizing the media to deliberately fan the flames of it.
Yeah,
and stuff like that. And it's not like that hasn't been used by other people probably in history to fan panics. I mean, the Nazis are doing that in a weird way. They're causing a kind of mass delusion that they're then fanning about, Jews and stuff like that. I suppose it's
radio
arguable
stories,
in a weird way.
Pamphlets.
They're using the media to create
newspapers.
this hysteria about things in their own population. So I suppose it becomes this is to be discussed, because this is a whole thing I have about that we're all living in constant mass panics and mass delusions.
I think that's really true. Yeah, very much.
Yeah, I do too.
Nightly
but
news.
Here's what's weird to me is that you can go back, and this is something that super interests me. You can go back to before there's any of this media like this, to the Middle Ages, when a lot of this, and I'm sure before this there were crazy panics, the Romans I'm sure everybody, but in the Middle Ages there were these not uncommon manias and mass delusions, well, I don't know if they're delusions, but mass panics that all fall under the blanket term of dancing manias.
Oh.
And we're talking from the 14th to the 17th century, these mass movements of people having these crazy physical reactions and being unable to stop dancing.
They can't stop dancing.
They can't stop dancing. And it would sort of was almost like it was contagious. It would move from small villages to towns, and I mean thousands of people marching through towns, just like freaking
just
out,
gyrating.
And dancing and shit. And there were efforts to gyrating. There were efforts to stop it by playing music, which made it worse. Because people thought if we play music, if we get out there with our sack butt and our, with all of our crazy
what
stuff.
What a horrible way to...
Yeah, but that it was only making it worse, actually. And
well, were they poisoned, or were they
but this is what's fact. Well, I don't think. Well, this is interesting. So you had different versions of this, and again, it's almost like culturally determined. That in a lot of what's now Germany and France and stuff like that, no, it was this kind of you were having it was demonic possession. There was all these theories about why it was happening. But of course, a lot of it's happening around the time of the Black Plague and plague. So again, there's these stressors.
Like social stresses, yeah.
Yeah, totally. But it's interesting that in Italy, it was slightly different. They had these things in Italy and Southern Europe, more kind of southerly. They had a different thing, and in their opinion, it was tarantism. It was people had been bitten by tarantulas.
No way.
And it was this whole crazy fear that there were tarantulas, which I'm like, I thought tarantulas are like Quito, Ecuador. I was like, I didn't think tarantulas were like Europe. Aren't they kind of a tropical or subtropical? Not that I'm sure they couldn't get to Italy if they wanted to, but I'm like, it's so funny to me. But that was their big thing. Was
really?
That it was tarantulas, which is, I think, where the word tarantella, the dance, which is a kind of dance and a kind of music comes from.
That's
that people were having these. And I think people thought, but isn't that weird? But that was not in Northern Europe. That was not a thing.
That was only in Southern. Yeah, these things are very specific. Like you could have a general response, which is under stress, human beings will do some fucked up, body gyrations. But then the local culture sort of dictates, and then there are these kind of healthy
special
versions.
Coloring to it.
Yeah, like you were saying in Germany, they had the Walpurgis night, which is like to celebrate Saint Walpurgis, you'd kind of go apeshit crazy. Just
Which is
like
Halloween, basically, isn't it? Isn't it kind of Halloween?
Yeah, exactly.
Well,
Halloween,
but doesn't Halloween come
Gras.
out of Walpurgisnacht? Isn't Halloween? Maybe not.
I don't know the history of Halloween like I should, but it is like...
damn you. God damn you.
What kind of horseshit chinwag is this?
What kind of fucking philosopher do you call yourself? Jesus Christ,
I know.
man.
God, I wrote a book on monsters.
But it's a kind of witches' Sabbath, night of witches, night of... Yeah, you did. Yeah. You wrote a fucking book on monsters and you can't tell me about Halloween. Jesus. No, but you're right. But then people kind of formalize it and make it a thing of okay, we can go batshit at these certain times of the year.
Structure it for this time of the year.
Yeah, that you can go crazy, which goes back, the Romans were doing that, I think.
Yeah.
They were having these carnivals where people, and then the Romans just generally, everybody just
then
went
they just,
batshit
yeah,
in Rome.
let's make it all.
It was just like everybody go crazy all the fucking time. And especially you like, emperors, especially the emperors,
Caligula.
You're invited to go crazier than anybody.
Nero.
Yeah. But they did sort of like, that's interesting.
I mean, even the games could be seen this way. What the Roman games might be seen as a way of getting emotional, like pent-up emotions that are unhealthy out of your system, so then you can go back to your life of structure.
Well, I suppose you could
repression.
Say that about sport and things like that in general.
And hysteria happens in like fucking football games and stuff.
And you definitely have some of these things we're talking about. There's riots and panics and stampedes and stuff at concerts or sporting events. There's a lot of that.
Yeah,
there's a lot of those things happen.
We should let me just say one thing about Contagion, because I think it's important, because you can't understand the spread of it without the contagion component. And we now know that I'm going to try to redeem myself because I didn't know about Halloween.
Yeah, that would be nice. About okay, that would be good. Here we go. Okay, it's not as good as knowing about Halloween, but go ahead.
Yeah, let me
tell
do
me
it.
about
Let
Contagion,
me do what I can
Professor.
Okay. So you and I have like what we call like mirror neurons, which is there's part of our brain that observes like let's say I'm grabbing something like a piece of food with my hand, and I can see it with my eyes, but I can also feel it with my motor system because my hands are grasping it. And what they discovered in Italy, actually, about 15 years ago or so, they noticed they had these monkeys all hooked up, and they had like little electrodes into their synapses, and they found that when a monkey is like eating a grape, let's say, there's a certain part of the brain that's lighting up. But then they noticed that, when the monkey just watches somebody else eat, the same exact neurons fire. And so they began to do more experiments, and they found that primates and mammals like us,
fascinating.
We mirror what's happening in another person. So if I see you getting really afraid, I actually catch the fear in my own brain. Yeah.
Which makes total sense. Is that an explanation? I'm serious. Is that an explanation for yawning? Maybe why people like yawn when they see somebody yawn, and then they like, wow, that's really crazy.
It also explains porn. Like, here's a left turn for you.
Holy cow. That's
speaking of mass hysteria.
Okay.
Well, I mean, go ahead. If you see someone else getting aroused, you will actually start to get aroused. So I've heard. I've never seen porn, but I'm told that
that's good.
That's how it works.
That's good. Yep. Yeah, you want to maintain your standing at the university, Professor. Right. You don't want to. Okay. But that's really interesting, and that certainly explains. I mean, because there are all these explanations for the dancing mania thing of it's a weird epilepsy. It's some kind of but it's interesting you say that too, because there's a weird thing in both instances of this, that the color red in Northern Europe and the color black seem to drive people crazy when they saw it. But it's odd for me that like you say that and you think, well, all it took was a couple of people to freak out at the color red for everybody to start freaking out at the color red or the color black, or to just see somebody dancing out of control and to get that fear. So the contagion is not just a physical, it's physically based, but psychologically takes effect.
It can be like, here's an example that shows you the emotional part is if your mother, when you're a baby and your mother smiles and is also like giving you like a caring touch, or you're being
Didn't
fed.
happen with me, by the way.
Okay.
I'm kidding. Don't know what you're talking about, but go ahead.
We need a show
we need
on
a whole other
thing.
show. Not in my experience, but keep talking, Professor.
Okay, so most people's mothers would smile when they're, but Paul's mother would frown. And no, if you have a correlation like that, where the smiling face comes with a positive emotion.
Equals, right, yeah.
Then whenever you see people smile, you get a little nice warm feeling.
Wow.
And it's totally because we're so conditionable, like we're mammals.
That
we get conditioned.
Makes so much sense out of a lot of this stuff we're going to be talking about.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
I was wondering if you want to give like I know this is a classic example. You're the only person I know who knows so much about the Mad Gasser of Mattoon.
Well, now the Mad Gasser of Mattoon, sure, we can get to the Mad Gasser of Mattoon. I mean, in some ways, this is going to be just a rundown of favorites because it's like I just love a lot of this shit.
Favorites.
My freaky favorites, because I do. But the Mad Gasser of Mattoon is later. And again, it's 1940 in the 40s, 44 or something like that, I think, in Mattoon, Illinois, which I guess is in sort of south central Illinois.
Yeah, it's kind of near, it's south of Urbana-Champaign. I've driven by it before.
Right. Yeah. So it's a small town, small city in Illinois. And in the 40s, again, there's stressors because it's World War II is going on. And, you know, a lot of the young men aren't in town and stuff like that. There's a lot of sort of women living on their own and older people and stuff like that. And I think there was even like a chemical factory or something, or munitions factory or something nearby. So it's like that contributes to it too. But starting in sort of April of 44 is this, people begin experiencing, there's a couple. It starts with a couple who are in their bedroom, they're asleep, it's nighttime, and they suddenly smell something strange, and they can't move their legs, and they experience paralysis in their legs. And this, in over like only about a 2-week period, begins to catch on.
So both of them experience it? They're like, I can't
move? Both of them experienced it. Both of them experienced it. I believe. And then I think maybe that night or the next day, it began happening to more people. And it's oftentimes it was women, and there is some thinking that sometimes in a lot of these mass delusions, and they're kind of crazy fainting panics at girls' schools in places. I mean, there's all these kind of examples of, not all the time, but there's certain. But in this instance, a lot of the people experience it were women, although men did too. But this begins to happen: strange smells, paralysis, nausea, dizziness, vomiting, all these kinds of things begin overtaking these people. Pretty early on, one of these people says there was a guy at the window, tall man dressed all in black with a tight-fitting skull cap.
It's not Hat Man.
And it's not Hat Man. It's not a big hat. But it's interesting because it sounds like Hat Man. It sounds like Spring-Heeled Jack. It sounds like all these
archetypes.
It sounds like Slender Man. It sounds like all of these like archetypes of like a creepy man, a tall man in black.
Can't make out the face kind of thing.
Can't make out the face. Some witnesses will say he's carrying one of those kind of like insect sprayer kind of like big sort of like, some people will say he's got a thing like that with a rubber tube on it. People are discovering holes in their screens and are thinking he's like, but there's always a smell and it begins to increase.
So the idea is he's sticking like a gas into the room. He's gassing people gassing them in the room.
Gassing people in their room. One woman finds a handkerchief on the porch when she comes home, smells it, and has all this stuff happen to her immediately.
Oh, really?
And nearby is found, and this is one of my favorite, I cannot believe I know all this shit about this. Nearby, you'll look at me. I'm not even looking at notes, am I? You can see.
No, you are.
Nearby,
this is all from memory, everyone.
Nearby is found a well-worn skeleton key and an empty tube of lipstick. Nearby. And some of the people claim it's a woman and not a man in black. And some people begin to play it's a woman.
There's got to be a movie made about it. Somebody needs to make a movie.
Believe me, it would be great. Footprints, all kinds of weird shit. But it begins to get really out of control. And part of it, again, is media. It begins to hit newspapers in the area, and everybody starts pushing it along. And
does it go national or it stays local?
It goes national. No, it goes national. And vigilante squads. I think the National Guard may have even come in. I can't remember. But it's only about 2 weeks. And people are freaking the fuck out. And I mean, and it's bad. And it takes over everybody. And then it stops. It just stops.
And so it's just like a 2-week, 1 month
just
kind
about
of thing.
2 weeks, it kind of stops. And nobody's ever quite sure why it stopped, what caused it to stop, but it just stops. And it's an interesting one because it's like it's a kind of case study that people really love for studying this mass hysteria and the media as a part of it. And it's used in psychology textbooks as a prime example of this stuff.
After you told me about it, I had never heard about it. After you told me about it, I do see it crop up, like along with the witch trials. It's like the Mad Gasser.
It does. It's like, it's a really, but it's such a great, I mean, Mad Gasser of Mattoon, like is not, there's no better, there's no better title than that. But there is some thinking, it's interesting that, was it mass hysteria? Was it driven by the media? But there is, I will not lie to you, some thinking by reputable people that maybe something was actually happening. There is some thinking that maybe somebody did do something once or twice.
Or like a government experiment, like let's see what this does to people and we can run a program on it.
Possibly.
CIA
Possibly. There's some thinking that it was toxic waste maybe, because I think there was some sort of, it was maybe a munitions factory or something. And there was sort of waste being dumped around this place, which they also think, maybe it was that. But it's got a lot of interesting.
Was anybody permanently hurt by this, or they would always get their
that
legs
I don't know.
back
That's an excellent
and all
question.
that stuff?
That's an excellent question. That I don't know.
I have a theory as to why, like almost every theory I can think of as to why this may happen more to women is probably not good. But here's a good theory as to why.
Are we going to get letters now?
Yeah, here come the letters. But here's my theory is, if I'm right about the mirror neurons, there is a lot of argument from anthropology and social psychology that women are much more attuned to social cues and empathy than men are.
That makes sense.
Therefore, if anything is going to travel contagion-wise, women are going to pick it up more quickly than men are because we're like fiddling with a carburetor or I don't know,
Is that what it is?
Yeah,
is that what does it? Because we're all working on our car, Steve. Is that really where you're going with this?
I should have had a better example.
No, or maybe we're just not so empathetic. Maybe we're just assholes. Maybe it's that. Maybe we're bigger assholes.
Fair enough.
We have a preponderance of the asshole gene, and women don't. Maybe it's that. I don't know.
There is
that's really interesting. That makes
TikTok, sense. Girls are having strong influences from certain kinds of performances on TikTok. And there's actually like certain maladies like Tourette's. Kids will share the difficulties of their lives and with the fans. Hey, here's what it's like to live with Tourette's. And then some of their fans will actually acquire some of the symptoms.
I've seen that. That's interesting. I've seen that. That's really interesting. Not so crazy sounding. And interestingly, again, I think about these dancing manias, and one of them was literally started by one person, by one woman. And all accounts, I mean, it's for the Middle Ages, it's like pretty accurate. You get the woman's name and everything. I can't remember what it is now. I'm like, wow, somebody was really keeping pretty good records about this shit. But it's like from many sources, there was one person, and conceivably it might have been somebody suffering from something like that.
Yes.
And that was enough at that time to freak the shit out of people because it was unknown and it was something so,
what is like Saint Vitus or Saint Vitus?
That's what they started calling it, Saint Vitus's dance. Because I think
that's a real thing.
But it is, and now I think it relates to a lot of like Huntington's chorea and stuff like that.
Yeah, there's neurological.
That it's neural. But I think that's because one of the first instances of it happened in some parish where that was the church was St. Vitus's. And so he became associated with people trying to cure themselves of this. So a lot of people would make these crazy ass pilgrimages, everybody just fucking dancing and leaping around. Oh, I forget we can't see ourselves anymore. Everybody just fucking dancing around.
You should see Paul right now, people.
Thank you. It was uncanny. It was terrifying what I was doing. It was like dancing around and heading to try to get cured. And you would go to any kind of site that was related to St. Vitus was seen, I think, too.
Did people dance so much that they died or they?
Some people, there's some controversy about whether people actually did die, but there's some thinking that some people did die.
Yeah, I don't think I could dance for more than like an hour without I did a workout and I've been in pain ever since. Yeah, I would just
really. You think you'd drop if you danced?
Yeah. Absolutely.
I wonder. I tell you, if I got out on the dance floor, it'd be everybody else would die, baby.
You could start a revolution, dance revolution.
I'd kill everybody, baby. I'd kill everybody. There's another interesting factor of this stuff that relates to the Middle Ages ones, which are interesting to me, which is this whole and ergot fungi.
Oh, yes, I've heard of ergot.
I don't know that much about this, but ergot poisoning is a thing that a lot of people think can be. They attribute it to a lot of crazy kind of visionary poetry in the Middle Ages. These kinds of religious visions and stuff. Is that it's a particular mold that grows in certain kinds of grains. Am I right about this?
Yeah, like I think rye
and
yeah,
different
wheat,
cereals
rye
and ryes,
sure, yeah.
which a lot of these places, this is what they were making their bread out of. And bread was like you ate bread. I mean, people, you may have eaten a lot of other things, but you for sure ate bread in the Middle Ages. Like,
you didn't eat a lot of other things.
You didn't eat a lot of other things. Maybe if you were rich, you ate some fucking
once ate a peach.
Deer meat that had been sitting around for a while that somebody put a shit ton of salt on and served to the king, and this was a delicacy. But bread was definitely and this mold grows on it, and it has some active ingredient in it that's related to LSD.
Yes, that's what I've heard. It does cause hallucinations.
So it causes mass hallucinations. And it's horrible, too. I didn't know that it really, ergot poisoning can kill you. It can cause gangrene and stuff like that,
can it really?
Yeah, so in a lot of these medieval paintings, you see these kind of people who look like lepers and stuff, and they think that they're actually supposed to be sufferers of ergot poisoning.
Wow.
And so that it's like that there's a similar thing. But that, Hieronymus Bosch, that great
painter,
Flemish medieval painter who painted these pictures of hell and paradise, and they're crazy.
They're really
bananas.
They're
and
totally
some people
nuts.
are like, he was eating a lot of bread.
His stuff looks trippy as hell.
Yeah,
it's surrealism, hundreds of years before Salvador Dali. It's fantastic,
right. And some of that stuff, you look at it and you think, I don't know, maybe there's something to it. I sometimes don't like theories like this because it feels like it reduces stuff down to like, if he hadn't eaten that moldy bread,
he wouldn't have had these great.
it wouldn't be those great paintings. And so it's like sometimes I feel a little bit like it can be reductive.
Yeah, but see, look at so how many other people ate all of this ergot bread and they just went they just had a conniption and laid down and never did anything.
They just yelled at their kids or something.
He took it somewhere. He made it into something great.
That's true. I suppose that makes it sort of worth it. But
But I think a little bit, I'm not sure I'm getting this right. I'm sure listeners will correct me, but I believe ergot in a very small portion is Pitocin, which helps the female give birth because it actually causes contractions in the uterus. We're all back to the uterus. Yeah, we've come full
fascinating.
circle.
It really is. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Really?
And, I believe that's true.
Well,
this is I don't want to die on that hill.
Well, no, I don't want you to die there either, buddy. I'll be right there with you.
Right.
And if we're in the foxhole together in this shit.
Somebody will correct us.
Absolutely. Hopefully somebody corrects us. But that's interesting because there's some thinking that ergot poisoning relates to the Salem witch trials.
Yes.
That some of what these women maybe were experiencing that led people to say they were witches was a result of ergot poisoning, which
I've heard that.
is very interesting.
It would explain
given also what you just said, too. It's
because you have hallucinations.
Hallucinations. That's really interesting.
Paranoia.
Yeah. But again, that takes away from, again, men just being assholes, too.
Well, men were also accused of being witches then, too.
That's
I know
true,
mostly
That's true,
women went down for it, but if you look at the whole history of witch hunting, a lot of men were also accused of witchcraft. It definitely wasn't sort of gender specific, but I do think women took the brunt of it, probably.
And they were called a word that I really love, warlocks, which is a word that I really like. Yeah.
That is a cool.
But there was a time where I thought of changing my name to Paul Warlock.
Paul Warlock.
Just Warlock, not your body. No, that's like a stage. It's like a professional name. It's a professional name.
Your career would have had a different path.
You think so? I wonder. That's that's a whole other interesting topic, which is names. Like how much do names matter? And again, as like psychological memes or whatever is the shared thing. Like how much
do you think your name has prevented you or
from the greatness I could have achieved? It has held me back. It has held me back from being at the pinnacle of my profession, Steve. Koro, Koro.
Koro
is a form of mass delusion and panic that you told me you had never heard of, which I was
have
surprised.
not heard of that. That sounds
Koro.
Japanese.
It is widespread all over the world. So we can get out of Europe. We can get out of Europe and talk about the world. Koro is a shared delusion. I mean, it can afflict an individual, but it can become mass.
Okay.
And it is a fear of genital retraction or shrinkage. Now, this just happens. This happens to men. It can happen to women. Or penis theft in general, which apparently is mostly occurs in African countries.
Wow.
That your penis is being stolen
by like a witch doctor or something?
Oh, for retribution, for a witch doctor, warlock, whatever. And that so it is this fear that my penis is shrinking or retracting into my body and it's going to disappear, or somebody has stolen it. And it becomes, and apparently the Chinese in China, it's a real thing. And a lot of these kinds of folk remedies you hear about.
Yeah.
Tiger penis and rhino. Yeah, well,
I've done some of them. I've done some of them. Yeah.
Is it Stephen Ozma for Koro sufferers? Should we have a whole? Do we need you? But have you done some of those things? Really?
I've done them because only in the sense that all TCM, which is traditional Chinese medicine, is sort of available everywhere. Sort of in a light version, like teas and roots and animal parts.
Yeah.
And every time I did, because I lived in China on and off for a couple of years. Every time I would do something, like I was sick or I had a cold or whatever, they'd like, take this and here's a ground up, femur
tincture
from this. Tincture of this animal.
Tincture of tiger penis? I mean, tiger penis is a big one.
Well, those things are kind of illegal now. So those are controlled. But you can get all kinds of animal parts, a lot of like scorpion in alcohol and stuff like that.
Really?
And I think I told you the story about drinking turtle blood and
yeah, but it's always a good one to trot out again. Although actually, we agreed that we would never actually hear the story.
Okay,
you would just say that you drank turtle blood once. Okay, yes, very good.
But they always added on like, hey, this is going to be good for your cold, but also your penis is going to get bigger, and you're
apparently it's quite prevalent in China. I saw that Koro is actually
wouldn't surprise me,
fairly well known. But Koro is just one of this just kind of extraordinary litany of weird things.
That reminds me, there's a witch hunting manual by a German named Institutus.
I know where you're going with
this.
Right?
This.
Yep.
You remember this? And he said they believed that through witchcraft that witches could steal the penis.
Steal your penis.
Yeah. Yes. And then he tells this hilarious story where they find that all the penises have been stored in a nest up a tree.
That's right.
And this guy climbs to the top, and the guy who's missing his penis is like, could you fish out a bigger one?
Right, exactly. And that's the Malleus Maleficarum. That's called that
well
book.
Done.
The Hammer of Witches.
The Hammer of Witches.
And it was a handbook for finding witches.
Yeah.
Right? It was a handbook that was like, if you need, here's how you find your witches, fellas.
Yeah.
Here's your book, and you'll know the questions to ask. You'll know what to look for, the signs to look for. Yeah, it is an amazing book.
It's incredible.
But there's so many. I just want to run down just a brief, because I will consult my notes, because it's like there's just too many. The Tanganyika laughing epidemic of 1962, the Hammersmith ghost hysteria. The Halifax slasher. The Hammersmith ghost hysteria is basically exactly what it sounds like.
Oh, you just
1803, people freaking out because there were ghosts being seen in that part of London, and everybody freaks out. The Tanganyika laughing epidemic was in what is now Tanzania in 1962 in missionary schools in Africa. The children having these massive laughing outbreaks that wouldn't stop.
They can't stop.
It went on for weeks. Hysterical laughing.
Wow.
And again, they think it's because, as I said, like I just said, it's going from Tanganyika to being Tanzania. And so there's political stresses going on.
Colonial.
And a lot of it, and a lot of it was
fighting.
Independence, exactly. And a lot of it was missionary schools. So you have this conservative colonial culture raising these kids. And at the same time, I mean, this is an interesting theory.
That's very interesting.
You have all these new ideas and ideas about independence from all this shit, so they think that that's
I
a
wonder
stressor on it.
If you feel stress and you have no way to express it because of political or social constraints, then maybe the body, it just has to go somewhere. And so it just comes out of the body in this weird sort of deviant way, like laughing, dancing, hitting people.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Except here's one that I really love. The Seattle windshield-pitting epidemic of 1954. That's
what was
the
that?
Seattle. I came across this because I was doing some research about this. Not like I know everything about this. And I was looking, and I came across the Seattle windshield-pitting epidemic of 1954. People starting to be like, wait a second, there's weird holes in my windshield.
Oh my God.
What's happening here? Vandals. No, it's sand fleas. No, it's cosmic rays. And as the media got a hold of this, it got crazier and crazier.
It spiraled.
Is it radio frequencies from the new crazy giant radio tower they just built outside of town? Yeah. And it spiraled into this crazy thing because of people finding all these little holes in their windshields. It's 1954. Abruptly stops again, which is weird. Because maybe the media loses interest.
Right.
And maybe then it after 2 weeks, they're going to lose interest if nothing's
They're going to go on to something else, yeah.
And a theory, too, about that is people for the first time were looking at their windshields and going, there's a lot of, people were like, what? You mean there's holes in my, what the fuck? Yeah. And looking at their windshields and starting to freak the fuck out.
They were always there, in other words.
They were always there. It was one of the things that people were saying. It's like, you've always got little pits in your fucking windshield, especially in 1954. Yeah. I'm sure the glass was like far less shitty glass. And it's like you're getting all this. But I love that. I'm like, the fucking Seattle, that's fucking crazy.
It's so specific, it's got the year, the town.
But this brings us up. Now we can't, because we don't, but this brings us, actually, we should get to the most current one that we're experiencing.
What's that?
Which is Havana Syndrome.
Oh, yes. This is very
current to us now.
Yeah.
Actually, we have been, all of us have lived through, which might be ongoing, I'm not sure, a great example of what some people are calling a mass panic or mass hysteria or mass delusion.
Describe what it is.
But there's conflicting thoughts about it.
Yeah, exactly.
Too. And but it is in Cuba in, what was it, 2012 maybe, I think?
I think it's all
something like that.
It's all in the last 15 years, maybe even 10 years.
Easily, yeah. The last 10 years or so. Cuba. We've opened up to Cuba. All of these government workers, State Department, military, Defense Department people in Cuba begin to experience strange headaches, nausea, dizziness, strangeness, motor problems, all of these kinds of things. And it becomes a huge, I think there's, and then it begins to crop up in other places too, all over the world.
And usually like diplomatic offices within other countries.
Embassies
not always,
and people.
Embassies, yeah.
But even so far as people in D.C. claiming it happening. And somebody working right near the White House, I think people working right near the White House claiming it's happening.
Yes.
And 1,000 people, I think 1,000 documented cases.
Oh, is that
something
many?
Like that. Yeah. And so it's bizarre, it's puzzling. People claiming that they're hearing weird sounds, kind of strange,
like tones,
tones and things like that. Some people, if I remember right, saying they're in the room and in a certain part of the room they hear it, and in another part of it they don't hear it.
Oh.
So this whole idea that it's a directional sonic weapon begins to develop.
Okay.
And that it's
like a gun that's shooting a sound,
some kind of thing,
wave that's actually damaging the brain or something.
That's doing something to the brain.
With the brain.
And then there's a lot of investigation if this goes on. And there's some, as I remember, there were some highly reputable institutions testing this up and saying, yes, people's brains are swelling. People are experiencing something unique. People are experiencing something that we don't know what the explanation for it is. I don't know if it's unique, but they don't know what's causing it.
Well, I think I think that there's like a certain, it's like sort of like the UFOs too. There's a certain number of them that have been explained by other underlying medical conditions or phenomena, but then there's another number of them, let's say it's 1/3, which are currently unexplained. And so they're open to this theory that it could be a weapon.
And there's enough of those going on that it's like, that it causes some.
But some people say psychosomatic, right? Some people say it's in the head,
which is
of
what a lot
person.
of people say about these ones. And as we were saying before, there's a lot of these things happen at sort of schools where there's like mass faintings or mass nausea or people having headaches or people like, and that this seems similar in that it's like, but what's interesting is it's Yeah, it's one person experiencing it on their own. It's not, you're not around a bunch of people that it's happening to, which is interesting.
But then you can talk to others.
That it's just similar. Yeah, then you can talk to others, and that can start to happen. And so I think the CIA and the defense and national defense have said it's not, there's nothing that we can determine is happening, but they're still saying they want to help the victims of it, which is good. And in fact, there's a thing called Helping American Victims Affected by Neurological Attacks has been set up by the government, which is an acronym. Havana is the acronym.
Seriously? I didn't know.
Helping American Victims Affected by Neurological Attack. Can you imagine being the guy who realized he could make an acronym that was Havana?
He's like,
that was a good day at work for that guy. That guy, the intern who came in was like, oh my God.
Nailed it.
Guy, yeah, totally. The fucking Capitol Hill intern who's just like, oh shit. Perfect. Well, that was a ton of fun. We really hope you enjoyed this Chinwag. Thank you for listening. We have bonus content coming your way in a few days, so please keep an eye out for that. And don't forget to like us, follow us, rate us, and review us. All that kind of good stuff. We love to hear from you. And until next time, wag on.
Chinwag is a production of Treefort Media and Touchy Feely Films. Hosted and executive produced by Paul Giamatti and Stephen Asma. Executive producers for Treefort are Kelly Garner and Lisa Ammerman. Dan Carey is executive producer for Touchy Feely. Our series producer is Rachel Whitley Bernstein. Original theme music by Luke Top, with additional music by Via Mardot. Oscar Guido is our executive in charge of production. Tom Monahan is head of audio for Treefort. Audio production supervision by Matt Dyson. Editing and mixing by Jeff Neal. Animation created by Alex Sokol. Research assistance by Aidan Brooks. Lastly, for more information, go to chinwagpod.fm and find us on Instagram or TikTok at chinwagpod or on Twitter at chinwag_pod.